He disguised himself as a beggar to test them. What happened when he revealed his real face shocked all. The air in the Grand Omnicorp boardroom crackled with an unusual tension, a stark contrast to the usual hushed reverence that accompanied any gathering presided over by Silas Thorne. Sunlight, filtered through the high, arched windows, usually cast a warm, golden glow, but today it seemed to illuminate a subtle chill that permeated the polished mahogany and expensive art. Every executive, every family member present, seemed to hold their breath, their gazes fixed on the man who stood not on his opulent throne at the head of the impossibly long table, but before them, a figure of profound stillness amidst their growing unease. Silas Thorne, the architect of Omnicorp, the titan whose name was synonymous with innovation and immense wealth, appeared before them, his presence an enigma. His silver hair, usually meticulously combed, was slightly disheveled, adding to the impression of a man on the precipice. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept across the room, lingering momentarily on the impeccably dressed Julian Thorne, his grandnephew, and then on the icily composed director Evelyn Cade, his chief operating officer. They sat with an air of barely concealed impatience, their faces carefully schooled to display concern, though a keen observer, like the man standing before them, might detect the predatory glint in their eyes. A hunger thinly veiled beneath layers of cultivated civility. The game, as they say, Silas's voice, though aged, resonated with an unexpected strength that belied the whispers of his supposed terminal decline, is finally over. The words hung in the air, a pronouncement rather than a statement, a final, definitive period at the end of a long, intricate sentence. A ripple of confusion, quickly masked by feigned solicitousness, ran through the room. Julian shifted in his seat, the expensive fabric of his suit rustling softly, a practiced, indulgent smile playing on his lips. His mind, Silas knew, was already calculating, already anticipating. "Uncle Silas," Julian began, his tone dripping with false sympathy, a saccharine sweetness that made Silas's stomach churn. "We understand this is difficult. Perhaps we should reschedule, give you more time to rest. These matters can wait." Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, merely inclined her head, her expression a careful blend of professional deference and thinly veiled exasperation. She saw the meeting as an unnecessary delay in the inevitable transfer of power, an irritating formality from a dying man. They saw a frail old man, clinging to vestiges of power, perhaps succumbing to the ravages of age and illness. They were utterly oblivious to the true nature of the game he spoke of, or the chilling revelation that was about to shatter their carefully constructed realities. They believed they held all the cards, that his retirement was imminent, and his vast empire ripe for the taking. The irony of their arrogance, Silas thought, was a bitter, delectable thing. The man they dismissed, the man they condescendingly pitied, was about to become their judge, jury, and executioner. The anticipation of their realization, the precise moment their carefully constructed world would implode, filled him with a quiet, grim satisfaction. Silas Thorne had not always been the embodiment of disillusionment that stood before them. In his youth, he had been a man of boundless ambition and an almost naive faith in human potential. He remembered the smell of grease and solder in the cramped garage, the late nights fueled by cheap coffee, and an unshakable belief that technology could solve the world's problems. He had built Omnicorp from nothing, a testament to his genius and relentless work ethic. From a small garage startup, it had blossomed into a global technology empire, its tendrils reaching into every facet of modern life. They had started with a revolutionary communication protocol, then moved into sustainable energy solutions, followed by cutting-edge AI. Each success was built on a foundation of genuine belief in progress and a desire to uplift humanity. He had amassed a fortune that few could comprehend, an empire built on innovation, foresight, and a profound understanding of the future. Yet, with each successive zero added to his net worth, a parallel emptiness seemed to grow within him, a hollowness where his early ideals once resided. The initial signs were subtle, like faint cracks appearing in a perfect facade. The increasingly transparent flattery, the sycophantic smiles that never quite reached the eyes, the sudden eagerness of distant relatives to reconnect, their questions always circling back to his portfolio, his health, his future plans. His once vibrant family gatherings, filled with laughter and genuine connection, became strained affairs dominated by thinly veiled inquiries about his health, his investments, his will. His executives, once partners in a shared vision, seemed to transform into opportunistic strategists, their conversations peppered with references to market capitalization and shareholder value. Rather than the pioneering spirit that had defined Omnicorp's early days, the spark of innovation, the genuine excitement for groundbreaking projects, seemed to have been replaced by a cold, clinical pursuit of profit. Loyalty, he began to suspect, was a currency, and his immense wealth made him a prime target for those who valued it above all else. He felt like a golden goose, constantly poked and prodded, rather than a leader. The turning point came subtly, yet profoundly, during a supposedly intimate family dinner at his sprawling estate, a place that once felt like a sanctuary but now felt more like a cage. His grandnephew, Julian, a young man whom Silas had generously supported through various ventures, a failed tech startup, a dubious art gallery, a boutique clothing line, had casually, almost negligently, remarked on the burden of managing such a vast fortune. Julian's eyes, even as he spoke of burden, gleamed with a covetousness he could barely mask, implying that Silas should perhaps consider a more structured approach to his estate planning. A clearer path for succession that Julian clearly envisioned leading directly to himself. The casualness of the suggestion, the underlying assumption of his imminent incapacitation, stung Silas more than any direct insult. Later that week, Evelyn Cade, his chief operating officer, a woman he had mentored from a junior analyst position, saw as a protégé, had presented a detailed contingency plan for leadership transition in the event of his incapacitation. The plan was a masterpiece of corporate efficiency, cold and precise, and it effectively marginalized his long-standing philanthropic commitments, dissolving the Omnicorp Foundation into a series of smaller, less impactful initiatives, all in favor of aggressive profit maximization. She spoke of optimizing assets and eliminating non-core expenditures, her eyes devoid of any recognition of the human cost. Silas saw through their carefully constructed facades. Julian's charm was a thinly veiled mask for avarice, his ambition fueled by an insatiable desire for unearned power, a hunger for status without the merit to back it. He wanted to reign, but not to build. Evelyn's efficiency was a cold, calculating instrument, devoid of empathy, focused solely on the bottom line, even if it meant trampling over human dignity, laying off loyal employees, or cutting corners on ethical sourcing. They saw him not as a patriarch, a mentor, or a human being with a lifetime of achievements and values, but as an obstacle, a walking vault, whose demise would unlock unimaginable riches. The realization was a bitter pill, one he swallowed with a growing sense of despair. He had spent his life building, creating, believing in the good of people, pouring his soul into Omnicorp. Now, he felt surrounded by vultures, circling, waiting for him to fall, to pick clean the bones of his empire. The thought of his life's work, his legacy, falling into such rapacious hands was unbearable, a betrayal of everything he stood for. He needed to know, with absolute certainty, who truly cared, who truly embodied the values he had once believed were inherent in humanity, and who merely coveted his fortune. He needed to strip away the pretense, to see raw, unfiltered human nature. Thus, the audacious, almost theatrical, plan began to coalesce in his shrewd mind. He would feign a terminal illness, a rare, debilitating condition that would explain his gradual withdrawal from public life. He meticulously crafted a narrative of declining health, using his vast resources to acquire medical reports and expert opinions that supported the fabricated diagnosis, creating a digital paper trail so convincing it would fool even the most skeptical. He began to appear weaker, more frail, his public appearances becoming increasingly rare and brief, his voice growing hoarse, his movements slower. He was an actor perfecting his final, most critical role, rehearsing every cough, every stoop, every vacant stare. He spent weeks studying the nuances of frailty, observing the elderly and the infirm, internalizing their mannerisms. Then came the grand vanishing act. Under the cloak of secrecy, aided by a handful of trusted, long-retired associates who owed him a lifetime of loyalty, Men and women who had built OmniCorp with him in the early days and possessed an old-world discretion rarely found in the digital age. Silas Thorne disappeared. His private jet was tracked to a remote, luxury medical facility in Switzerland, from which, a week later, a death certificate was quietly issued, citing his fabricated illness. News of his passing sent shockwaves through the financial world. A brief, corporate-mandated period of grief quickly followed by a scramble for power among the very individuals Silas sought to expose. Julian and Evelyn were among the most prominent, their public displays of sorrow quickly giving way to private machinations and power plays. But Silas Thorne was not in Switzerland, nor was he dead. He was, in fact, orchestrating his own resurrection, not as the titan of industry, but as a ghost, a forgotten fragment of humanity. He underwent a meticulous transformation, shedding the polished veneer of wealth and power, a process that was both physically demanding and psychologically jarring. His fine suits were replaced by threadbare, ill-fitting clothes sourced from charity shops, smelling faintly of dust and other people's lives. His immaculately coiffed hair grew long and unkempt, streaked with dirt and grime. His once manicured hands became calloused and stained, reflecting a life of manual labor, a stark contrast to the soft hands that had once signed multi-billion-dollar deals. A prosthetic piece, painstakingly designed and applied by a master theatrical makeup artist, aged his face further, adding hollows and shadows, creating the illusion of chronic deprivation of years spent on the streets. He learned to stoop, to shuffle, to cultivate the vacant stare of one accustomed to being invisible, to hunch his shoulders against the imaginary cold, to hold a cardboard sign without shame. He practiced for hours in front of a mirror, shedding Silas, embracing Arthur. He became Arthur, an elderly, disheveled beggar, a shadow among the throngs, waiting to witness the true faces of those who believed they had outsmarted him. He felt the profound weight of anonymity, the crushing reality of being utterly unseen. The stage was set, the unwitting actors were in place, and the cruel irony of their impending downfall hung heavy in the air, unseen and unheard by all but the hidden orchestrator. Silas, now Arthur, found his new reality to be a stark, chilling contrast to his former life. Every sensation was amplified, every discomfort a brutal reminder of his adopted identity. The bitter wind bit through his thin coat, searing his skin. The damp pavement seeped into his worn shoes, leaving his feet perpetually cold and numb, and the stares of passers-by, when they even registered his presence, were a blend of pity, disgust, or outright indifference. Most often, there was simply nothing, as if he were part of the scenery, a ghost in the bustling city. His self-imposed exile in the underbelly of society was not merely a disguise, it was an immersion, a profound, visceral lesson in the true cost of anonymity and poverty. He chose the areas around OmniCorp Tower, the gleaming monument to his life's work, as his primary vantage point. Its polished glass and steel now seemed to mock him, a cold, unfeeling monument to a past life. It was here that his grandnephew, Julian, and his chief operating officer, Evelyn Cade, would cross his path, their movements tracked by a hidden network of microcameras and discreetly placed sensors, though he relied mostly on direct observation. One crisp morning, the air sharp with the promise of winter, Arthur sat huddled near the main entrance of OmniCorp Tower, his back against the cold, polished granite, the smooth surface offering no warmth. A chauffeur-driven limousine, sleek and dark as a shark, pulled up to the curb, its engine purring softly. From it emerged Julian Thorne, a vision of tailored elegance, his expensive suit clinging to his athletic frame as if sculpted. The scent of his high-end cologne, faint but distinct, reached Arthur, a ghost of his own former life. Julian paused at the entrance, adjusting his silk tie, his gaze sweeping over the bustling street with an air of proprietary satisfaction, a king surveying his domain. His eyes, however, skimmed over Arthur without truly seeing him, as if the beggar were merely an inconvenient part of the urban landscape, no more significant than a discarded coffee cup or a forgotten newspaper. This was the first test, and Julian failed it without even knowing he was being observed. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," the doorman, a man Silas had personally hired years ago, a loyal, diligent employee, greeted Julian with a respectful bow, a deference Silas had once enjoyed. Julian offered a perfunctory nod, his attention already elsewhere. Just then, Arthur let out a hacking cough, a genuine one, for the cold had begun to truly settle in his bones, a deep, rattling cough that echoed in the quiet morning. Julian flinched, his perfectly sculpted features momentarily contorting into a grimace of distaste. He recoiled slightly, as if the sound itself were an affront. "Can't something be done about these vagrants?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Arthur to hear, his voice laced with annoyance, a casual cruelty that chilled Silas more than the morning air. "They sully the image of the building." He didn't offer a glance, let alone a coin, merely swept past, leaving a faint trail of expensive cologne in his wake, his hurried steps disappearing into the grand lobby. Silas felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but it was now laced with a cold confirmation. Julian's contempt for those less fortunate was not just an act. It was intrinsic, a core component of his character, hidden just beneath the veneer of sophisticated charm. Days later, Arthur observed Evelyn Cade's arrival. She strode with purpose, her designer briefcase clutched in one hand, her phone pressed to her ear, her movements precise and efficient. She was speaking in clipped, authoritative tones about quarterly projections and market dominance, her voice sharp and unyielding even from a distance. As she approached the building, a sudden gust of wind, an unpredictable swirl of air, caught her scarf, a luxurious silk creation, sending it swirling towards Arthur's feet. He instinctively reached out, his gnarled fingers fumbling to catch it before it blew away, a reflex born of decades of courtesy. Evelyn stopped abruptly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the dirty old man holding her expensive silk. Her perfectly manicured hand recoiled, as if from contagion, a visible shudder passing through her frame. "Don't touch that," she snapped, her voice sharp and devoid of warmth, a whip-crack of disdain. She snatched the scarf from his grasp, pulling it away as if his touch had contaminated it, as if his very poverty were contagious. Without another word, she swept into the building, her high heels clicking sharply on the pavement, leaving Arthur to stare at the spot where she had stood, a bitter taste in his mouth. Her disregard for a simple act of courtesy, her visceral revulsion, spoke volumes. Profit, not people, was her true religion, and anyone who did not contribute to that profit was deemed less than human. These encounters, and many others, began to paint a consistent, devastating picture. Arthur spent his days outside Omnicorp, witnessing the parade of wealth and power, the casual cruelty of those who had once fawned over him. He saw Julian dismiss a charity collector with a dismissive wave, heard Evelyn instruct security to discourage loitering by anyone detrimental to the corporate image, her eyes flicking to Arthur for a moment. He heard their casual, dismissive remarks about the drain on society and the burden of the poor, words that were once abstract concepts in boardrooms, now directed at his very existence, at the lives of people he now walked among. Their greed was not merely for money. It was for control, for status, for the untrammeled pursuit of their desires, regardless of the human cost, regardless of who they had to trample to get there. He watched them from the shadows, their unawareness of his true identity only amplifying the chilling irony of their actions. Each disdainful glance, each cutting remark, served as further evidence, solidifying his resolve. One particularly cold afternoon, as a biting rain began to fall, turning the streets slick and mirroring the gray sky, Arthur felt the familiar gnawing of hunger in his stomach, a constant companion. He had not eaten a proper meal in days, relying on scraps from bins and the occasional meager donation from a genuinely kind stranger who spared a coin or a piece of fruit. He huddled closer to the building, seeking meager shelter from the elements, trying to make himself smaller, less visible. Just then, a young woman emerged from the service entrance, pushing a large cart laden with cleaning supplies, the clatter of bottles and mops echoing in the damp air. She was slight of build, her uniform a simple, practical outfit that looked too thin for the weather, and her face, though tired, held a quiet dignity that immediately set her apart. This was Lena, a janitor at Omnicorp, a silent figure in the corporate machine, whose presence was as overlooked as Arthur's own. Lena noticed Arthur, shivering, his face pale with cold and hunger, his thin frame shaking. Her own lunch break had just begun, and she carried a small, modest container of food, rice and a few vegetables, a simple meal she had prepared herself, likely the only substantial meal she would have that day. She paused, her eyes, filled with an empathy that Silas had rarely encountered since his disguise, met his. She saw not a beggar, not a nuisance, but a fellow human being in distress. Her gaze was direct, yet gentle. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, devoid of judgment or pity, only genuine concern. She didn't shy away from his grime, didn't recoil. Arthur merely nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, a surge of emotion he hadn't anticipated. Lena's gaze softened further. She looked at her small container, then back at Arthur, a flicker of internal debate, a moment of selfless decision. Without hesitation, she opened it and extended it to him. "Here," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips, radiating warmth. "It's not much, but it's warm. You should eat." Silas, in his disguise, was profoundly touched. He had expected charity, perhaps, from some, but not this unassuming generosity, this quiet act of sharing from someone who clearly had little herself. He took the container, his hands trembling slightly, and ate slowly, savoring every bite. The food was simple, plain even, but it was the most delicious meal he had tasted in weeks, not for its flavor, but for the profound kindness that accompanied it, the pure, unadulterated compassion. "Thank you," he managed, his voice raspy with emotion and disuse. Lena nodded, her smile unwavering. She sat down next to him, a small distance away, not out of discomfort, but out of respect for his space, a delicate understanding. "It's a tough world out there," she said, her gaze distant, reflecting her own struggles. "But we all need a little help sometimes." She shared a little about her own life, the challenges of supporting her younger siblings on a janitor's meager salary, the constant struggle to make ends meet, the sacrifices she made daily. Yet, there was no bitterness in her voice, only a quiet resolve, a resilient spirit. She spoke of her dreams for her siblings, of their education, of a better future she hoped to provide. As the rain intensified, turning from a drizzle to a steady downpour, Lena looked around, a practical concern in her eyes. "It's going to get colder," she observed, shivering slightly herself. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" When Arthur shook his head, a silent admission of his homelessness, she hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought, then made a decision, a clear spark of conviction in her eyes. "Come with me," she said, rising with determination. "There's a spot in the basement, near the boiler room. It's usually warm and out of the way. No one bothers you down there." Silas followed her, a strange mix of emotions swirling within him, gratitude, astonishment, and a touch of surrealism. He was entering his own building's hidden depths, a place he had never seen, led by a kind-hearted janitor. Lena led him through a maze of service corridors, past storage rooms filled with forgotten equipment, past utility closets smelling of bleach and dust, until they reached a small, forgotten corner near a large, humming boiler, its warmth radiating through the small space. The air was indeed warm, almost stiflingly so, a haven from the biting cold outside. "You can rest here for a bit," she said, her voice soft, her concern genuine. "It's not much, but it's safe." She then pulled out a small, worn blanket from her cart, a personal item she used to cushion her knees during cleaning, perhaps. "Keep this," she offered, pressing it into his hands. "It gets cold at night." Silas looked at the blanket, then at Lena, his eyes welling up with a gratitude that transcended words. This young woman, who earned barely enough to survive, who carried her own burdens with quiet strength, had offered him more genuine compassion than his own family or executives ever had. She saw him, truly saw him, and offered not just aid, but dignity, recognizing his humanity when others had stripped it away. Over the next few weeks, Lena became Arthur's quiet guardian angel. She would occasionally bring him extra food, a warm cup of coffee smuggled from the break room, or simply stop to chat for a few minutes, always with that same unassuming kindness. She never asked for anything in return, never seemed to expect it, her actions purely altruistic. She was, Silas realized, the embodiment of selfless compassion, a stark, luminous contrast to the darkness he had found in those he had elevated to positions of power and trust. She spoke of small joys, of her siblings' laughter, of finding beauty in simple things. These interactions solidified his resolve. The test was complete. The results were clear. His will, once a document of legacy, would now be an instrument of justice, precisely calibrated to reward true virtue and punish profound vice. The day of the Omnicorp annual general meeting had arrived. The grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel buzzed with the nervous energy of shareholders, investors, and executives. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting dazzling reflections on the polished marble floors. The air was thick with speculation about the future of Omnicorp, particularly since the untimely demise of its legendary founder, Silas Thorne. Julian Thorne, radiating an almost insolent confidence, a smug satisfaction, stood on the dais alongside Evelyn Cade. They were the architects of the new vision, the self-proclaimed heirs to Silas's empire, ready to unveil their plans to a captive audience, their faces a picture of triumph. Julian cleared his throat, a self-important smirk playing on his lips, the sound amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice booming across the room, full of self-congratulation, "today marks a new era for Omnicorp. While we mourn the loss of our revered founder, Uncle Silas, we also embrace the future with renewed vigor and a bold new direction." He paused, allowing his words to hang, savoring the moment. Evelyn nodded, her expression grimly triumphant, a silent affirmation of their shared victory. They were about to announce a series of aggressive restructuring plans that would, they believed, consolidate their power and maximize their profits, plans that included massive layoffs and the divestment of philanthropic arms, all disguised under the guise of streamlining operations. Just as Julian prepared to delve into the finer points of their ruthless strategy, the massive oak doors at the back of the ballroom, heavy and ornate, swung open with a dramatic creak, echoing loudly in the suddenly quiet room. All heads turned, a ripple of curiosity passing through the crowd. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright hallway light, a figure that sent a ripple of bewildered recognition, then outright shock, through the room. It was Silas Thorne. He was impeccably dressed, not in his usual bespoke suits, but in a tailor-made, perfectly fitted black suit that exuded power and authority, a silent declaration of his return. His hair, now neatly trimmed and styled, gleamed silver under the chandeliers, and his beard, trimmed short, framed a face that, though still bearing the marks of age, was sharp, intelligent, and devoid of any feigned frailty. He walked with a deliberate, unhurried pace, his stride purposeful, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with Julian and Evelyn, whose faces had drained of all color, turning a ghastly white. Behind him, a stern-faced lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a man known for his discretion and formidable legal prowess, followed with a thick leather briefcase, its contents about to shatter lives. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a stunned silence, so profound that the soft hum of the air conditioning became audible. Whispers erupted, then shouts of disbelief. "Silas Thorne? But he's dead. It's impossible. I saw the obituary." The murmurs grew into a roar of confusion and incredulity. Julian Thorne's face was a mask of utter horror. His jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a terror that superseded even his greed, a primal fear of the impossible. Evelyn Cade, for the first time in her professional life, looked utterly, spectacularly undone. Her composure shattered, her usually calculating mind seemed to seize up, unable to process the impossible. The grand stage they had meticulously prepared for their coronation had become the setting for their judgment. Silas reached the dais, stopping directly in front of Julian and Evelyn, his presence dominating the space. He looked at them, his eyes piercing, yet without a trace of anger, only a profound, chilling disappointment, a weariness born of betrayal. "My dear Julian," he said, his voice now strong and resonant, carrying to every corner of the room, a voice that commanded attention, "and Evelyn, you seem surprised to see me. Perhaps you believed the news of my demise a little too readily." Julian stammered, his voice high-pitched, betraying the panic that was rapidly consuming him. "Uncle? Uncle Silas? How? What is the meaning of this? We mourned you. We held a memorial service." His words were a desperate attempt to cling to the narrative, to deny the impossible. Evelyn, regaining a fraction of her composure through sheer force of will, managed to force out, "This is preposterous. A hoax. You were confirmed deceased. We have a death certificate." Her voice, usually so controlled, trembled slightly. Silas merely smiled, a cold, knowing smile that sent shivers down the spines of Julian and Evelyn, a smile that promised retribution. Deceased? Perhaps the old Silas Thorne, the one who foolishly believed in the loyalty of those he entrusted with his legacy, is indeed dead. But I assure you, the new Silas Thorne is very much alive, and he has been watching. He gestured to Mr. Thompson, who calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, their presence a silent threat. "For the past months," Silas continued, his voice gaining momentum, a narrative unfolding before the stunned audience, "I have been conducting a rather unconventional due diligence. A test, if you will. A test of character, of humanity, of loyalty. I wanted to see who would mourn my passing genuinely, and who would merely dance on my grave, eager to plunder my life's work. I wanted to see who truly embodied the values I believed Omnicorp was built upon: innovation, yes, but also integrity and compassion, and who merely paid lip service to them while plotting their own ascent." He then held up a tattered, dirty blanket, its faded threads a stark contrast to the opulence of the room. It was the same blanket Lena had given him, a small, yet profoundly significant, symbol. "You see this?" he asked, his voice softer, yet no less impactful, drawing every eye to the humble object. "This was given to me by a stranger, when I was cold and hungry, dismissed and ignored by those who claimed to care for me most. This was given to me, not to Arthur, the beggar you so readily scorned and tried to remove from your sight, but to Silas Thorne, your founder, your patriarch, your CEO." The revelation hung in the air, a physical weight, pressing down on Julian and Evelyn. They stared at the blanket, then at Silas's now familiar, yet strangely alien, face. The color drained from their faces once more as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, a horrifying realization dawning on them. The old man they had insulted, ignored, and tried to expel from the premises, it had been him. The sheer, terrifying irony of their actions crashed down upon them, a wave of sickening understanding. They had failed the ultimate test, and they had failed it spectacularly. The mask had fallen, not just from Silas, but from their own grotesque, avaricious faces, revealing the true ugliness beneath. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rapid, shallow breaths of the two exposed individuals. The aftermath of Silas Thorne's dramatic revelation was nothing short of a corporate earthquake. The ballroom erupted in a cacophony of gasps, shouts, and camera flashes, the air thick with the scent of shock and impending scandal. Journalists scrambled, their pens flying across notebooks. Lawyers conferred in hushed, urgent tones, and the faces of shareholders ranged from stunned awe to outright outrage, many realizing how narrowly they had avoided a catastrophic shift in the company's ethical direction. Julian Thorne and Evelyn Cade, once poised to seize control, now stood exposed, their carefully constructed facades crumbling into dust, their carefully planned future evaporating into thin air. Silas, with Mr. Thompson by his side, did not mince words. His voice, calm yet firm, cut through the clamor. He held up a second document, a new will, meticulously prepared during his time in disguise, a document that represented months of painful observation and a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. This document, he announced, his voice resonating with an unyielding finality, is my true last will and testament. It supersedes all previous versions. It reflects the truth I have witnessed, the character I have observed, and the values I now know to be paramount for Omnicorp's future. He then turned his gaze directly to Julian, whose face was now a sickly shade of green, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Julian," Silas stated, his voice laced with the didactic tone of a disappointed patriarch, a lesson delivered not with anger, but with profound sadness for what Julian had become. "Your actions, your words, your very demeanor towards those less fortunate have revealed a fundamental flaw in your character. You saw only opportunity where you should have seen humanity. Your inheritance, once assured and considerable, is now gone. Not a single share of Omnicorp, not a single penny of my personal fortune will pass to you. Furthermore, your lavish allowances, your company positions, and all corporate benefits are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Consider yourself disinherited, Julian, not by my death, but by your own profound lack of empathy." Julian let out a choked sound, a mixture of disbelief and utter despair, as security personnel, alerted by Mr. Thompson, discreetly moved to escort him from the dais, his futile protest swallowed by the buzz of the room. His dreams of an empire, of limitless wealth, evaporated in an instant, replaced by the bitter reality of public shame and financial ruin. He was nothing but a pariah, stripped of the very things he coveted most, reduced to an object of pity and scorn. Next, Silas turned to Evelyn Cade, who stood frozen, her mind frantically racing through legal loopholes that no longer existed, her usual sharp intellect paralyzed by the shock. "Evelyn," he said, his voice chillingly calm, slicing through the air like ice. "Your ruthless pursuit of profit, your casual disregard for human dignity, and your willingness to sacrifice compassion for corporate image are unacceptable. You prioritize the bottom line over the very soul of this company, over the people who built it and the people it was meant to serve. As of this moment, you are terminated from your position as Chief Operating Officer of Omnicorp. All stock options, severance packages, and executive benefits are forfeited. Your reputation, once formidable and unassailable, will now be synonymous with this betrayal, a cautionary tale. You have proven yourself to be a liability, not an asset, to the true spirit of Omnicorp." Evelyn, usually so composed, her features a mask of professional stoicism, could only offer a silent, furious glare, her immense power, her professional life, and her future collapsing around her like a house of cards. The image of the beggar she had scorned, the man she had ordered removed, now haunted her, a terrifying specter of her own downfall, a bitter taste of poetic justice. Then Silas's voice softened, and a rare, genuine smile touched his lips, a warmth radiating from him that had been absent for months. "But there is one individual," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the room, searching for a familiar face, who embodied the true spirit of generosity, kindness, and compassion. Someone who, despite her own struggles, offered warmth, food, and human decency to a man she believed to be utterly destitute. Lena, the janitor. Lena, who had been sitting in the back row, attending the meeting as a simple employee, having arrived early for her shift, wanting to catch a glimpse of the corporate world, gasped. She had never imagined she would be part of it, let alone the focus of such attention. She rose slowly, her eyes wide with bewilderment, her face a mixture of shock and profound humility, a flush rising to her cheeks. "Lena," Silas continued, his voice filled with warmth, addressing her directly, "your selfless acts of kindness towards Arthur revealed a character of immense integrity and empathy. You saw a human being in need, not a nuisance to be avoided or removed. You shared your meager lunch, offered comfort, and showed genuine care when others, with far greater resources, showed only disdain and cold indifference. For this, I am eternally grateful, and you shall be profoundly rewarded." He paused, letting the words sink in, allowing the room to grasp the magnitude of what was about to unfold. "Effective immediately," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "Lena, you are appointed to a newly created position within the Omnicorp Foundation, Director of Community Outreach and Philanthropy. This role will allow you to leverage Omnicorp's vast resources, the very fortune I amassed, to help those in need, to extend the same kindness you showed me, on a much larger scale, to uplift countless lives. Your annual salary will be commensurate with a senior executive, and you will have unlimited resources at your disposal for approved philanthropic projects. Furthermore, as a personal gift, I am endowing you with a trust fund of $50 million, along with a fully paid-off, beautiful home in the neighborhood of your choice, a car, and scholarships for your siblings' education, ensuring that you and your family will never again struggle, that their futures are secure." Lena could only stare, tears silently streaming down her face, tears of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. $50 million. A home. Education for her siblings. It was an unimaginable fortune, a complete reversal of her life's trajectory, a miracle bestowed upon her. She, who had known only struggle and selfless giving, was now the recipient of a generosity beyond her wildest dreams, a testament to the ripple effect of her simple, profound kindness. The room erupted in applause, a genuine, heartfelt ovation for the quiet heroism of a young woman who had, without knowing it, passed the ultimate test of humanity with flying colors. The contrast between the two fates, the catastrophic downfall of Julian and Evelyn, stripped of their power and wealth, and the miraculous ascent of Lena, was a stark, powerful testament to the unwavering moral compass of Silas Thorne and the unyielding truth that character, indeed, is destiny. Months had passed since the extraordinary revelation at the Omnicorp General Meeting. The world had slowly adjusted to the shocking return of Silas Thorne and the equally dramatic redistribution of his empire's power. Omnicorp, under Silas's renewed leadership and with Lena at the helm of its philanthropic initiatives, began a profound transformation. The focus shifted from relentless profit maximization to ethical innovation and social responsibility. The corporate culture, once cold and competitive, slowly began to thaw, infused with a renewed sense of purpose and a genuine commitment to community. Employees, once fearful, now felt a renewed sense of pride and belonging, knowing their contributions were valued beyond mere profit margins. Silas, no longer burdened by the pretense of illness or the gnawing doubt about those around him, found a profound sense of peace, a tranquility he hadn't experienced since his early, idealistic days. He had purged the parasites, elevated the deserving, and reshaped his legacy into something truly meaningful, something that would benefit society for generations. He spent his days mentoring Lena, guiding her through the complexities of corporate philanthropy, watching with quiet pride as she blossomed into a powerful, compassionate leader, her natural empathy proving to be an unparalleled asset. Her quiet strength and unwavering kindness proved to be far more effective in driving positive change than any cutthroat business strategy Julian or Evelyn could have conceived. Lena, now living in a beautiful, modest home with her thriving siblings, embraced her new role with characteristic humility and dedication. She established programs that provided housing for the homeless, scholarships for underprivileged youth, and support for struggling families. All initiatives that reflected the very kindness she had shown to Arthur. She remained grounded, never forgetting the days of her own struggle, and her actions continued to be guided by the pure, unselfish compassion that had first caught Silas's discerning eye. Julian Thorne and Evelyn Cade, once titans of industry, had fallen into ignominy, their names now whispered as symbols of greed and betrayal. Julian, stripped of his inherited wealth and corporate connections, found himself adrift, his carefully cultivated network having vanished with his fortune, leaving him isolated and bewildered. He was forced to confront the harsh realities of a life without inherited privilege, a stark, painful lesson in self-reliance that he had never bothered to learn. The lavish lifestyle he took for granted was gone, replaced by the struggle of genuine scarcity, a mirror of the very lives he had disdained. Evelyn, her reputation irrevocably tarnished, found herself blacklisted from the corporate world, her ruthless efficiency now seen as a dangerous liability rather than an asset, a mark of her moral bankruptcy. Both were left to ponder the monumental cost of their greed, their vast fortunes replaced by the bitter currency of regret and public scorn, forever defined by their catastrophic failure of character. Silas, observing the transformed landscape of his life and his company, often reflected on the journey. He had sought truth in the shadows, and in doing so, had found both the worst and the best of humanity. He had learned that true character is not forged in the crucible of success and abundance, where masks are easily worn, but revealed in the crucible of adversity in the small, unseen acts of kindness that define who we truly are when no one is watching, when there is no reward to be gained. The most valuable treasures, he mused, are not measured in gold or power, but in the profound connections forged through genuine empathy and compassion, the quiet dignity of a selfless act. The story of Silas Thorne served as a poignant, powerful reminder echoed through Omnicorp and beyond. It highlighted the profound truth that character is best illuminated in the darkest of moments, when the masks of societal expectation fall away. It teaches us that genuine kindness, offered without expectation of reward, is a rare and precious commodity, a beacon in a cynical world. It reminds us that, ultimately, every act of compassion, no matter how small, sends ripples through the universe, destined to return in ways one could never imagine. For in a world often blinded by superficiality and the relentless pursuit of material gain, it is the simple, unvarnished goodness of the human heart that shines brightest, and that, in the grand tapestry of life, kindness will always find its reward. If this story of transformation and true character resonated with you, imagine the countless other tales waiting to be told. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you powerful narratives that explore the depths of human nature, justice, and the unexpected twist of fate. Don't miss another incredible story like Silas Thorne's. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. And we want to hear from you. What was the most shocking part of Silas's reveal? Do you think Julian and Evelyn deserve their fate? And what did Lena's act of kindness teach you about humanity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights fuel our community and help us bring even more compelling stories to life.